Hi everyone, and welcome to our last part for the African art section. So this is part 6. We are now going to look at the Greater Zimbabwe, and that is the last little section that we're going to be looking at. Oh, we still have to look at Mapungubwe and the African crafts, but it's pretty quick little end off for the section. So the settlement at Great Zimbabwe was part of a trading network. So they were trading with countries like China, India, Asia, and Persia. So all artifacts from those areas around the world were actually found at the Greater Zimbabwe. And it was a wealthy ruling class. So like I said previously, it was a lot more wealthy than what people expected or would have said before the colonialists actually came in. As many as 250 ruins have been found around this area, and the locals call it the Madzimbabwe. The Great Zimbabwe has very famous ruins which have curved walls. So if you look at the picture here, you can see how these walls were built. These are not modern walls. They were the 13th to the 15th century, so 1200s to 1400s. There was no mortar, so in other words, no cement was used to hold it together. It's literally just gravity that's holding it together. And it was built out of granite, which is very heavy. It was placed at angles to form a herringbone pattern. So you can see that the stones are placed at different angles to create little indents and places where they stick out more. So it's also very famous for its birds. In the structures, they are birds found atop perches. So each bird is about 30 centimeters tall, so the height of a ruler, and they are symbolic of authority of the king or chief. The body of the birds are like eagles, but the toes and legs are very human-like. They have no toes or claws, more like legs. The birds are ancestors that fly, and they can be messengers to the spirits, so they're symbolic of that connection to the ancestors. On the plinth, which is the base that it stands on, we've got the crocodiles, which are symbols of royalty. Right, then looking at Mapungubwe, remember that's also in South Africa. It's near Limpopo and Shasi rivers, and there are 2 hills near that river, and one of those hills is Mapungubwe. They would trade in gold, copper, and iron, and many of the gold artifacts and human remains were found here. There were 3 graves, and they were in upright positions that was associated with royalty. So if you were buried lying down, then you were basically a common person, and if you were buried upright, so standing like an Egyptian sphinx or a sarcophagus, you were seen as royalty. So very similarly to the Egyptians, gold and copper items were found within the graves. So they were buried with a lot of very expensive things. And the most famous thing that they found was this gold rhino. And it's actually not solid gold. On the inside, it was made out of wood, and then they took the gold and they hammered it so that it became thin like foil, and then they draped it around the wood, and they covered the wood in gold. Inside, the wood is actually deteriorated, and it's actually crumbling basically on the inside. But the way that it was buried has actually kept it quite safe. And then in 2003, Mapungubwe was declared as a heritage site, so it's more protected. And then I think this is lastly, African crafts. So all tribes have made their own functional objects over time. South Africa doesn't have many masks. So if you see masks, it's usually from further up in Africa. And they think that this is probably because of the migration for food and the competition for land. So when the Europeans came in, they came into South Africa and made the competition for land a lot more difficult on the South African local people. So they had to fight a lot harder, and then a lot of their culture was lost because of that. The rich culture developed in the production of products that were functional and aesthetics. Great. So thanks for listening to our African art section. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask, drop them in the comments, and keep an eye out for the next section of work. Thanks.